Let's get to it, Fred, and I want to start with you on India, because you think what happened on Monday was one of the best moves of the week and the way everyone came together. Just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll discuss the larger issues.
Sure. I think, when the Prime Minister went to the House and made clear what the evidence that they had, or that there was evidence that India was involved in a murder of a Canadian on Canadian soil, it was great to see the House unite, and Mr. Poilievre, I thought, really showed himself as a true statesman. Something that we saw over the summer, where they kind of rebranded him with these ads. They're really showing him what he could be like as a prime minister, and I thought that was a win for him. And my issue, of course, is the next day he reverted back to form, which I think was very disappointing, where he became that attack dog again, which is it's disappointing to see, because he got this poll lead, I believe, by showing that he could be a prime minister and showing that he's a caring person. But when he comes out that aggressive, it doesn't look.
Why do you think he did that? Because I noticed that, and we've talked about that this week. Is it because of the way diaspora politics plays in the Conservative base? Is it because of Stephen Harper and connections with Modi? Like, why the shift from Monday to Tuesday? What do you think?
It's completely internal party politics. That's what drives this. It's our base within Canada. The Conservative base is different than what he spoke on potentially on Monday. So that's where the shift was, and I think it's very disappointing to see he went down that road.
Mel, what's your take on that, and how the whole India issue played out this week?
Yeah, I had very similar feelings, seeing everybody speak in the House of Unity. This is a Canadian who was killed on Canadian soil. So to see the heaviness of that reflected in the House, I think was a nice moment of unity, but I think it also gave a really nice message to Canadians across the country that this is being taken seriously. I know through my conversations with Jagmeet that this is something that community members have believed for a long time and have never really been given the validation that this is true. So I think there was a recognition that all three parties are taking this seriously. I'm feeling validated, and that was a powerful moment. And to your point, seeing the reverse the next day was disappointing, but not surprising, unfortunately.
Greg, on that, the thing a lot of Liberals jumped on is the phrase "come clean." When Mr. Poilievre said on Monday, India needs to cooperate and be fully transparent, and the next day he said the Prime Minister needs to come clean on what he has. Where are you on this one?
I worked in opposition as Director of Communications, did a lot of prep for question period, and there's a rule that gets instituted every once in a while: no newspapers in the prep room. Don't follow headlines. And I think we saw this week a lot of hot takes and a lot of bad hot takes. And that as the week went on, as more information came out, and great credit to Evan Dyer for his reporting. I noticed Susan Delacourt reported this week that there were news organizations that have been working on this over the summer for a few weeks. I noticed Evan Dyer was very well informed on Monday, so I'm gonna connect some dots there on my own.
I can't do that, but
and again last night, the story that Evan broke filled in a lot of the blanks, but we shouldn't have to wait for that. Why was your first choice India? We talked last week. You were really smart, Mel, and you picked this, the coverage of the G7 and people that were, the pylon against Justin Trudeau. And I think what's happened is, people are showing their bias. And again, if you're in the opposition, you're a partisan, sure, have all the bias. We have biases on this panel. But as a journalist, you need to slow down a little bit and make sure that just because you think Justin Trudeau had a really lousy summer, that you are going to pick the other side here. I thought it was really bad. And, you talk about the president of the Ukraine being here. In the U.S., we see Republicans that are siding against Ukraine. And at least on this one in Canada, we don't. But that's for very political reasons. On the India one, it would have been nice to see that unity last more than 24 hours.
But Fred, it's a very difficult situation to find yourself in this kind of a conflict with a country of north of 1 billion people, with enormous economic influence, and as a geopolitical regional counterweight to China. But, as the week went along, it became clear why we find ourselves in that situation. There was Evans reporting, then the correction in the Washington Post that the Allies weren't actually refusing to stand with Canada on this, and then the reports in the Financial Times that Joe Biden brought this up with Narendra Modi. I mean, it has been a week of developments. Where do you think Canada and politics stands now on this as we go into the weekend?
Well, I think the Prime Minister, last week he looked very weak in India. Now we're seeing that, he actually held his own on this, and for him bringing this to the House. And the way this played out, and now that we're seeing this, the way Mr. Poilievre came in and asked, like, show us the evidence. Well, it's now coming out. We're now seeing that, at least not the particular evidence, but we're seeing that Five Eyes had it, like you said, in the U.S. So I think this is one of those issues where if Mr. Poilievre had waited a bit and just kind of see how this played out before he jumped the gun, at the same time, he looked like a statesman, and then he just flipped quickly. And I think that hot take stuff.
And there were questions that the opposition could be asking about this. How did this happen? What did you know ahead of time?
Police protection question?
Yeah, there were lots of things.
Very important one.
But I think it's important to note for folks that there was a late debate that the Conservatives didn't show up on this week. They also didn't ask any questions, as far as I can tell, in question period about this. So how big of an issue is this? This was a stunning moment, and we have the opposition not really following up in question period. It shows that there's some political, you're trying to contort yourself into a pretzel here, I think, to try to find a way to get at Justin Trudeau rather than look at the issue.
Well, Mel, I've never done question period prep, but when it is an active murder investigation and it's based on secret intelligence, do you go at that hard in question period? I mean, how do you approach an issue with those layers and complexities?
Right. Well, you see different types of questions, right? And when there's something that is that sensitive, they're almost seen as soft lobs a little bit, because you're not really trying to attack the Prime Minister or one of the ministers when you're asking that question. You're asking because you generally want,
you might
genuinely,
want
you
the
always
answer.
want the answer,
yeah.
but you're
legitimately for real.
removing, you're removing the partisanship. You're removing the drama a little bit, because you do take this seriously, and you know that it's a matter of utmost importance. Again, this is a Canadian who was killed on Canadian soil. You remove all of that, and you can do that quite eloquently, and we see it all the time. When other issues have happened, we've seen the Leader of the Opposition ask for an update in the House.
Like when there's a forest fire and a natural disaster and a state of emergency, that sort of tone. What can you update us on? What government efforts are? What are you doing there?
Yeah.
Right. I don't think we're going to see that on this particular one, just the way it's played out. But Greg, I want to get to sort of your pick for us this week, because the streets of Ottawa were pretty full earlier this week with the protests and the counter-protests about gender and LGBTQ policy in schools. What's your take on that one?
So when I was thinking about what topic I wanted to talk about, I thought about yesterday morning here in Ottawa. Local CBC Radio did a fairly lengthy piece on this, and the reporter, and this is posted, and I'm trying to be very careful here, but as the reporter pointed out, a lot of the voices of parents that were against any type of help, education around trans kids were religious, and they were Muslim. And I think about historically in the United States, in the South, the Freedom Marchers, where groups that had been treated very badly. The movie that Mississippi Burning's based on is about Jewish students going down. You can point to the United Kingdom, where during the coal strikes of the 80s, and the gay and lesbian community bonded with them, and it was really striking for me to see that the two groups that were there were the type of groups that were around the convoy, and very, very religious parents who, and I don't think those two groups are going to align on very much. I can't see them defending their rights. And then, David, there was a whole bunch of other things that just came out that just made me more and more dismayed. Ches Crosby, former PC leader in Newfoundland, making kind of light of this and being very much on the side of...
We call it an alphabet soup.
Yeah.
Right?
And as leader, he was there for a Pride sidewalk. He talked about indoctrination. And I think, you grew up in Newfoundland, Mount Cashel. I grew up in Cape Breton. The issues with the Catholic Church. This is such a slippery slope. And I've been watching the Conservatives, who have two, MPs that they point to all the time about how things have changed. Melissa Lantsman and...
Eric Duncan.
Yes. And, Michelle Rempel was posting about the big, blue, fabulous tent. Today, a few minutes ago, Poilievre has made fun of a Trudeau tweet about there is no place for homophobia or transphobia. This is such a slippery slope. And to Fred's earlier point, I wonder where the leader of the Conservatives thinks he's going to take his party with this.
Fred, what is the calculation here? And I know you got to put you on the spot here a little bit, but he says it's not his jurisdiction when it was New Brunswick, but this is they are siding firmly with the parental rights side, is what it seems to me, on an issue that affects a very tiny actual portion of the Canadian population has become so outsized. Mm-hmm. What is the calculation in the way the Conservatives are approaching this?
Well, if you look at the polling, it's very polarized in terms of when you ask the question different ways. Vast majority of Canadians support trans rights.
Right.
But when you word it about parental rights, and I don't know if people really understand what's being asked to them when that question's asked, the numbers shift drastically to parental rights. Mm-hmm. So I've seen in some provinces where you see Conservatives believe that's a winning issue for them, where they can push this and they can align their base and fire them up on this. Social Conservatives are a part of the Conservative coalition. That's the party that they go to, and there's been concern, particularly in the last election, that they drift to the People's Party. So there's always a fight and an attempt to always ensure they stay in-house with the Conservatives, and that's what a lot of this would be.
So, Mel, we're going to continue this because your pick for what you thought was the best move of the week is a stark contrast. Is how Jagmeet Singh and his caucus approached this.
No questions asked. Actually, I'll restart a little bit. My office is on Elgin Street, and I was sitting in my office this week when that protest was happening. And unfortunately, all I could see from the view from my office was the actual protest. And I sat there for 10 minutes, and oh my God, there are so many people getting increasingly more upset and sad about it. Right. Not seeing any of the coverage that was happening on the counter-protests. So when I saw that Jagmeet and the NDP caucus was out in big numbers with people from the Labour movement, from other groups supporting trans people, supporting LGBTQ people, and just being there as allies, going to the front of the protest to say, hey, we're here, we're not going away, and taking that kind of head on, to me was a really good moment, not for me, but for people who, when they were seeing the protest, thought, what is my place here? How do I belong here? Seeing that says, I see you, you deserve to be here the way that you are, and I thought that was just a beautiful contrast to what I had seen from my window that day.
We've talked about this issue quite a bit on the show, right? Because, we played a clip earlier of Heather Stephenson raising it in the Manitoba debate last night. Scott Moe is talking about using the notwithstanding clause. Blaine Higgs was greeting the protesters in New Brunswick on this issue. And Greg, what I struggle with, I got kids in school, and I've looked at their homework and met their teachers. I don't see indoctrination. Yeah. I don't see them sexualizing the kids. I don't know what people mean when they say this. And then I also look at the data of just how tiny a percentage of the population is represented, in the trans and non-binary community. And I struggle to understand the legitimate reason why it's become such an outsized political issue right now in Canada. And
I think on one of your shows you did the math, and this is less than one half of
it's about 100,000 adults, so it's like 1/5 of 1% of the Canadian population type thing.
And at the same time, we're told that affordability and inflation is the biggest issue. So it does feel like some sort of scary distraction where you're trying to get people to join your cause. And a lot of the language does seem very similar to stuff that's come out of the United States. But people evolve. I grew up very Catholic, against same-sex marriage. Now I'm just against marriage. But I worked for Belinda Stronach as a Liberal MP after she crossed the floor in opposition. And I remember Belinda used to get called to do a lot of events around Pride because although the Liberal caucus was in support of equal marriage, not everyone felt comfortable that they could do this and go back to their constituents. I remember Belinda being with Jack Layton at a Pride flag raising in either 2006 or 2007, and she was representing kind of the Liberals at the time. And at the time, there was probably about a 50% acceptance, and now it's in the mid-70s, and we've kind of moved on from it. Yeah. It does scare me a little bit, and again, I think this is why there are Liberals that are fired up to face the current Conservative leader that might not be if Erin O'Toole was given a second chance, because this feels like we're going backwards.
Right. So Fred, on this, you outlined the political calculation earlier about keeping your social conservatives in the tent. We got about 45 seconds to answer this, so I apologize if it's not enough time. But what's the risk of doing that on an issue like this? Is there a risk, or does the math and the numbers just line up in such a way that it is worth it?
I believe there's a big risk, as I said before, about the parental rights messaging. If that's what they're going on, and if that works, if they can stick to it, if it shifts to another message set, if the wording changes on this, because again, majority of Canadians do support trans rights, and if it shifts into that, that's very dangerous territory for Conservatives. We lose elections and seats because of abortion and other social conservative issues, and this could be another one if we're not careful.
Right, and it's pretty clear where the battle lines are on this one, right? Like Jagmeet Singh made it very clear when him and his caucus marched, the police had to get between them and the protesters. The Prime Minister, of course, was at the UN that day, but I think it's safe to say the Liberals are also of a similar view on how this is going to play out. All right, gang, a busy week. Look forward to doing this each and every Friday. I want to thank you so much to this panel, Fred Delory, Melanie Richer, and Greg McEachern. Thanks so much, gang.